Hello, and thank you everyone for joining us today for the first installment of Idea Growth Power Lunch Summit. This is John Pappas. I am going to be your moderator today, and we're going to be talking about internet gaming and sports betting advocacy in the COVID era. We've brought together a tremendous panel of experts to discuss how policymakers and industry can navigate in this new and uncharted environment. I want to thank, first of all, GeoComply for partnering with Idea Growth to put this Power Lunch Summit together. And for those of you who may not be familiar with Idea Growth, this organization is on the leading edge of internet gaming and sports betting advocacy. They are really the industry's eyes, ears, and voice in state capitals and in Washington, D.C. We've got more than 25 members and we're growing. And because of that, Idea Growth is a unified and powerful advocate for every type of company involved in internet betting. Before I introduce our esteemed panel, I do have a couple of housekeeping items to cover. First, if you have questions for our panelists during the webinar, we invite you to use the question panel on your screen to submit those. You'll see that there's a chat box there and you can submit your questions. And then after our main discussion, we'll have a Q&A session and we'll try to get to as many of your questions as we can. And we know some of you have already submitted questions in advance when you registered. Also, CLE credits are available for this session in Georgia, Ohio, New Jersey, and New York, along with states that have reciprocity. Again, in the chat area, you'll find a link to the course materials. It's already been posted there, along with contact information, should you have any questions about the CLE following the program. And if you require a verification code for CLE, that is also in the chat area on the slide decks throughout the program. And finally, if you haven't already, I encourage you to register for the next two Power Lunch Summits panels that are taking place tomorrow and Friday at noon Eastern. They're going to be great discussions, and the registration links again will be in the chat area at the beginning of this and at the end. And then also you can just visit the Idea Growth webpage and register from there. That's ideagrowth.org. So now that we've got the official business out of the way, I want to get down to the business of today's webinar. And I'm really pleased to be joined by a great panel of experts. Each of today's speakers have been in the trenches when it comes to the legalization and regulation of internet betting. And thankfully, they all agreed to share some of their knowledge with us today. First, I'm pleased to introduce Liv Simmons. She is Deputy General Counsel for Kindred. I'm also proud to introduce Senator John Ford from Indiana and Representative Brant Iden from Michigan. And finally, Corey Fox, who is Vice President of Government Affairs for FanDuel. Thank you all for joining with Idea Growth today for what I hope to be a very lively discussion about a very, something that everyone's really thinking about is how do we move forward given what we've all experienced over the last 6 months. There's been tremendous momentum for sports betting and iGaming to a lesser extent in the years leading up to 2020, and what is going to happen for the end of this year and 2021. So I'd like to start with Senator Ford. And Senator, as you know, the coronavirus has disrupted the way we live our daily lives, and it's impacted the ability of lawmakers even to, at all levels of government, to legislate. I'm curious to see how has it impacted work in Indiana from a process standpoint and from a practical standpoint.
Well, thank you, John, and thanks for having me on the panel. I look forward to a robust conversation. Here in Indiana, our session, the 2020 session, ended back in mid-March. So we have not been in session. Committees are just starting back, and one of the committees that has met a few times is a committee to develop a plan for our next session, which would be in January, and that's a long session where we do our budget. So it's extremely important that we have this session. We've changed some rules for testimony here at the State House, where lobbyists and the public are in one room and the legislators are in another receiving a video feed. So it's definitely a different feel to the whole legislative process, but we, our goal is to be in session in January in person with public input. And we may have some limits in terms of how many bills. Generally in a long session, there is no bill limit, but I would imagine we'll have some type of bill limit and really try to focus on the budget.
And how long will your session, is it expected to last till?
We go from January till mid-April, so 4.5 months.
And so was this last year's session cut short because of coronavirus?
No, we do a short session, a technical session, what we call, and that's usually about 2.5 months.
Okay, great.
And,
Well, we're going to talk a little bit later on in the panel about some potential legislation in Indiana on iGaming. But before we get there, I just want to get a sense from you, Representative Iden. Michigan already did kind of the hard work to pass iGaming and sports betting at the end of last year, but the state regulators were starting the process in the beginning of this year, and how has COVID impacted the regulatory process there?
Well, great to be with you, John, and I appreciate that. And it is an exciting time for us in Michigan because even with the pandemic and the ongoing issues, delays, and so forth that has caused, the good news is that the regulators were able to do a lot of this work from home. They were able to continue the process of drafting rules. And now that process has moved on to where we'll see next week a public comment session on those draft rules. Then that process will be kicked back over to the legislative process. A little cumbersome, may take us another couple weeks, but I'm confident that we're still on track to hopefully have something done by, I'm shooting for Thanksgiving-ish. I know that the Michigan Gaming Control Board has done a fantastic job with trying to move forward as quickly as possible. And, I think we're in a great spot to be able to have us up and running online and taking bets, assuming, companies are there and operators have their platform set certainly by the end of the year. And I think, like I say, as early as Thanksgiving potentially.
Great. Do you sense an anxiousness from the operators in the state, the tribal and commercial casinos, to try to get iGaming and internet sports betting up and running?
I really do. Obviously, as every state had the same problems that we did. Now, our commercial casinos here were closed for an extended period of time, almost 6 months. Our tribal casinos closed for 3 ish or so. Tribal casinos are now at full capacity. Commercial casinos, the 3 in the city of Detroit, are at 15% occupancy only still, according to the Gaming Control Board, and with a phase in, hopefully to get them to closer to 100% by the end of the year, depending on the governor's executive orders. And I think, though, because of that, they are anxious. I think the operators are anxious to get up and going, to see what the market can really bear. And I believe, anecdotally, of course, that there's a lot of pent-up demand. People are certainly venturing into the casino. We're seeing that in the tribal casinos, and we're seeing that in the city of Detroit a little bit, but there's still a lot of apprehension out there from folks, and the ability to be able to place those wagers from the comfort and security of their own home or wherever else they happen to be, I think is going to really add a great dimension to our gaming opportunities here in the state.
Great. Liv, I know Kindred Group has been really busy over the last several months engaging in new markets across the U.S. And as we're looking at how state budgets have been depleted due to the virus, it appears, at least on the surface, that there's an opportunity to advocate for revenue raisers like internet gaming and sports betting. So I think there's clearly an opportunity there, but there's probably some risks with that strategy as well. And I was hoping that you could discuss that a little bit.
Absolutely. And John, thank you for having me today. I think it's extremely important to understand the dynamics of the online gambling, the iGaming, and the online sports betting market. It's a market that's entirely consumer driven. So what you need to incentivize customers to move away from the offshore offer and play within a regulated licensed environment is you need a competitive and attractive offer. I think it's important to understand that that offshore offer remains very much available. It's literally one click away. So you need to incentivize customers by having an appealing product offer, a complete product offer to play within the regulated states. And what we see today is that either states haven't implemented regulation yet, or they're excluding a major product category, which makes the channelization success within a state very difficult. And that obviously has an impact not only on consumer protection, because consumers play in an offshore environment, it also has an impact on tax revenue. So there's huge potential in that regulation and making sure that regulation has a complete, appealing, attractive, competitive product offer within a licensed environment to attract customers, to make sure they play in a secure, protected environment, and ultimately to generate tax revenues. And I just want to refer to a 2019 survey on sports betting consumer behavior, which indicated that 52% of bettors, of punters today, still play illegally, play offshore. So there's a huge potential in bringing those customers within the regulated environments. Now, obviously, there is a concern that by regulating iGaming and online sports betting, there's a risk of problem behavior, of potential addiction issues, of customers losing control. I think there it's very important to emphasize that in an online environment, everything's traceable on a very granular individual customer transactional level. Everything's visible, which means that it's very straightforward for operators to intervene when they see movements in customer behavior, transactions going up, the activity going up, time of play changing, etc. And I think it's the responsibility, and it's a responsibility that we within Kindred take very seriously, to make sure that customers, through communication, through intervention, through monitoring, through proactively reaching out customers, moderate their gambling behavior, stay in control of their gambling behavior, and ultimately have a very a good experience, an entertaining experience with our services, with our products within that regulated framework. So there's a huge opportunity, and risks that are potentially attached to it can be very well mitigated in an online environment.
Yeah, well, I think it's really well said, because particularly as just a general public thinks about people being at home or stuck at home. I know that's loosening up quite a bit across the country, but when it was at its peak, I think there was some concern that, well, if people have access to gambling on their phones or at their home, that could create a problem gambling situation. And I think industry was very smart to be proactive and ensure that things were in place so that that wouldn't become a problem. Of course, more can always be done. And you know, as a plug for our panel on Friday, there is the Idea Summit panel will be focused on how companies can both increase their business and also offer gaming in a responsible fashion. Corey, just as a follow-up on this idea that, you know, states are going to be looking for tax revenue, do you think iGaming and sports betting is a place for them to look, or is sports betting revenue and iGaming revenue not going to be the panacea given the severity of these state budget deficits?
Thanks, John, and thanks for having me on the panel. Great to be here with Liv and with the two great representatives and leaders in authorizing sports wagering around the country. With respect to the tax revenue, I think it really varies by state. As you know, at a high level, when I'm speaking to state legislators, it's important that, we don't overpromise and underdeliver on state revenue. And I don't think anyone thinks that online gaming is going to plug all of New York State's, $13 billion revenue hole. That said, for many of the reasons Liv just discussed, I think it's really a no-brainer for states to seek out the revenue that is available here. States can bring activity that's currently taking place in an illegal market with no consumer protections into a legalized, regulated, and taxed market. They can protect their residents from unscrupulous operators, put responsible gambling protections in place, and raise revenue for the state. And I also think, there are specific state level concerns. A state like New York that's looking to open up its downstate casinos at some point over the next few years can increase the value of those licenses and raise even more money by authorizing mobile wagering at the same time that they authorize those new casinos. So I think it really varies by state. I think it is a legitimate way for states to raise revenue, bring users over from the illegal market, but I also think we have to be honest that it's not going to cover all of their COVID-related budget problems.
Right. Well, as I've said before, you can't get to billions until you get to millions, and this certainly could help along the way. And so, since now that we've kind of going to be going into a new legislative session with COVID as the backdrop, are there some other arguments that you think are going to be strong going into 2021 that we want to make with lawmakers?
Yeah, well, from my perspective, I think in the short run, many of our casino partners have really been focused on reopening their casinos, frankly, after in a safe way, after the worst of COVID had passed. But I think as they start to think about it long term, and as legislators start to think about the revenue that they expect from casinos long term, they'll realize there's a chance to increase the revenue they get, but also to de-risk themselves by allowing for online gaming, so that even if there is some reason, whether it's weather related or another global pandemic, I hope not, that the money can continue flowing and users can continue using the products they would use in person, but use it online. I also think, even as the casinos reopen, there are users out there who won't feel comfortable going to casinos, maybe because of a health problem they have in their own family or themselves. And to be able to do the same products online would be a great option for those users.
Great, great. So Senator Ford, you'd made some news recently saying that you were going to be introducing, or you're working on legislation to legalize iGaming. Indiana has already successfully launched sports betting in the state. Were you thinking about iGaming even before COVID, or was this something that you got together with some of the casino industry and said this is probably the right thing to do given the current environment and the future of gaming?
It's something that, I was watching and really watching the rollout of sports wagering. And, I think we had a very successful rollout of sports wagering, and really looking at some of the numbers and the the younger audience that we were able to attract to our industry here in Indiana really kind of opened my eyes that, there is some strong potential for iGaming. And then I think with also our neighboring state, Michigan, passing it this winter, also gave me the idea that it's maybe something now that it's time, right? We've taken these gradual steps with daily fantasy, sports wagering, and it seems just like the next logical step.
And are you hearing anything from the state casinos? Are they getting behind your effort?
I've started to have some talks with them, and I think some that may have been hesitant in the past, I think COVID has convinced them that this is something that we need to look at. Because here in Indiana, our casinos were shut down for 2 months and are now at 50% capacity, and we don't know when we'll come off of that 50% capacity number.
Right, right. Well, all right. I'd like to move on to the next subject for our discussion, and maybe we'll come back to some more of these questions towards the end. One of the things I've been wondering about as I've been engaged in this issue for many years, sports betting and the adoption of sports betting after PASPA was struck down in May of 18 has happened at, I think, lightning speed across the states, but iGaming has plotted much more slowly, and I'd like to get your perspective, Representative Iden, on do lawmakers view iGaming and iPoker, iCasino games different than sports betting?
Yes, I think that they absolutely do. Obviously, we had a very robust debate over the course of 4 years here in Michigan, and I was, tasked with not only educating two governors on the issue, but also about 180 new members as well. When unfortunately my first attempt at this was vetoed, and then I had to go back to the drawing board. And there is a big difference, and I think that it stems from a couple different things. One is a perception of gaming just in general. I think that a lot of lawmakers still, and it doesn't really matter which jersey they wear, whether they're Republican or Democrat, it's really more or less a social value issue for them as to whether or not they even embrace gaming. And the good news is that I think that that's changed for the better, and for the better of the industry in general. I think that, and Liv mentioned this a little bit earlier, I think that there's a lot of hesitation with iGaming when it comes to problem gaming, and that for some reason that could potentially be more addictive in some ways. And so there's really a lot of hurdles, and then of course the big one that we saw here in Michigan is just the drastic difference that both the governor and legislators took when taxing the industry. And obviously we know that there's obviously a lot less revenue in sports betting than there is in iGaming and so on. But really, at the end of the day, my colleagues decided, well, if we're going to move down this path of iGaming, we really want to tax it at this high rate. And the governor felt the same way. And there were a lot of different nuances for that I won't get into, but they are treated very separate in legislators' minds, I believe. And really what it takes then, so how do we overcome that problem? And that is really an education process. It's letting lawmakers know, and your colleagues, if you happen to be a lawmaker, that really the internet is the best way to sort of deal with problem gaming. We can track the way people bet. We can monitor their betting habits. We can, for instance, see that if they're placing $25 bets regularly, and then all of a sudden they're placing $2,500 bets, maybe there's something going on. We have a much better way of regulating players vis-a-vis the internet than we do in person. And I think that really that education process, when we talk about problem gaming, which I keep coming back to, because I really think that that's one of the biggest hurdles that folks have to deal with when educating folks and legislators on iGaming, is the problem gaming issue, and the basically just the assumption that this is going to spread massively once people have access to it on the internet. Well, you have to again come back to, we can regulate this better. This is all about consumer protection, which is, we want to get this away from the black markets and the offshore to regulating this in a safe, responsible way. And really, once you make that argument, it's amazing how legislators turn the corner on it. But I will tell you, it does take time, and it does take some education process, but it can certainly be done. And I really believe that that's the next step for states to move forward. And it's great to see that Senator Ford's taking the lead in Indiana on this. I think he's going to do a great job with it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think everyone's kind of been looking at Michigan as a real shining example to do them both at the same time. And I, perhaps other states that have already legalized sports betting will recognize that it can be done, and it should be done like Indiana. Liv, as the states are kind of looking at regulating iGaming and regulating sports wagering, are there some key differences between how they should be treated from a regulatory standpoint or from a policymaking standpoint that states should consider?
I mean, I think John, and I mean, I quickly want to go back to what Representative Iden said. People are looking for online entertainment, and we have definitely seen that, obviously, within the COVID area with the retail restrictions. And in order to ensure that customers do that in a controlled and a secure and a protected environment, regulation is really the only way forward, especially considering the fact that the offshore offer is still very much present today in the US. And I think, again, that the fact that people are looking for entertainment, and this kind of goes back to a Gallup poll, I believe, that was conducted in 2020, where 71% of Americans believe that gambling is morally acceptable. So there's a clear appetite from consumers who are looking to engage in mobile sports wagering or iGaming. So, the grounds are there. In terms of regulation, one could argue, again, that iGaming because it's more of a short odds game, leaving the live wagering aside. The intervention techniques with customers should be faster, should be perhaps a bit more in depth than they are with sports wagering. But we have seen, we have seen this trend obviously in Europe, where the majority of countries, of member states, have that full product offer available within a regulated framework. And what we've seen there is that having that uniform regulation and not really making that distinction on product level, having a clear, consistent framework that's clear for operators, clear for lawmakers, but more importantly, clear for the customer, is actually the most beneficial solution. So our experience in Europe has been that having that uniform set of rules for both products, iGaming and mobile sports wagering, is the most efficient way forward.
Interesting. And obviously, Michigan did it a little different because there are two acts. Corey, I know FanDuel is anxious to be up and running in Michigan, and I assume you guys will be doing both iGaming and sports betting in that state. As you look at Michigan, are there things that you guys have to do differently for iGaming and sports wagering, or are they essentially the same in your view?
I think they're largely the same, but as you know, we are operating the sports book at the Motor City Casino right now, and as it's opened up, we're seeing really, even with the 15% occupancy, as Representative Iden was mentioning, we're seeing really great numbers there, as I think there is pent-up demand, and the NBA playoffs and NFL starting this week offer a great opportunity for Michigan bettors to get involved in legalized betting for the first time. But I think we see it largely as the same. I think, people choose to go to a retail casino for any number of reasons that might include location, might include a great restaurant, might include a certain experience or environment that they're interested in. But online, it's really critical that we have also a great experience, but that's just a great product in terms of our sports book and great pricing. And I think, as Liv was sort of getting at, it's critical that we're able to offer pricing that's still profitable to us, but also competitive with offshore books that don't have to deal with any regulatory burdens or pay any taxes. So it's obviously a very competitive market online, both amongst the regulated and authorized sports wagering books and also the offshore books.
Right. Is Senator Ford, when you were in the trenches to get sports betting passed, I imagine you had a lot of interesting conversations with your colleagues and even your constituents. What were some of the biggest issues of concern that you heard about when you were engaged in that? And are you arming yourself for what I expect to be even more concerns when we start debating internet gaming in Indiana?
Yeah, to Brant's point, I mean, the problem gaming really was the biggest issue, big concerns over that. And I think education, we overcame some of those issues. But I think we are arming ourselves, we are preparing to educate my colleagues, and we'll educate the public a little bit. But I think, as it's been stated earlier, with online gaming, we will be able to track. We will have some systems in place to help people. We also, with our sports wagering language, we did move 3% to help with problem gaming, and I would imagine with iGaming we probably do something as well to make sure that we have the resources to help those that are in need of some help. Also, we had to do a lot of education on the product of sports wagering, if you will, and we'll probably have to do the same with iGaming. And thirdly, probably some, one of the things that were people didn't understand the gray market. People didn't understand that there's really people that are able to get, be able to wager on sports or gamble on their cell phones, and that it was that easy to do it. I mean, we still have some people here in Indiana that don't believe that the gray market is even out there.
Interesting. I mean, that actually leads to a question I had, but later on, but I'm going to ask it now. I mean, is that something that motivates lawmakers, knowing that there is a black market out there?
I think so. I think, bringing it in, like Liv said, bringing it into a regulated market so we can make sure that it's safe, we can receive some tax revenue off of it. I think that is a motivator for some legislators. Yes.
Great, great. So Corey, back to you real quick on as we think about kind of the misconceptions of internet betting. I know you're talking to lawmakers across the country, some not as educated on the issues as Senator Ford and Representative Iden. What are some of the things that you come up against, and what could we be doing better as an industry to combat some of those misconceptions?
Yeah, sure. So I think, at the risk of insulting some of Senator Ford's and Representative Iden's colleagues, I think quite a few lawmakers are not native internet users and are not really comfortable with what online means. And they often think that, an online sports book is the neighborhood bookie brought online, and they expect it to sort of look like that. And so, one of the things that we've done is we've brought representatives to come look at what the FanDuel offices look like. I know our friends at DraftKings have done the same thing, and they see, a really modern tech-first company that has a lot of ability to build in various tracking systems to ensure that we create a really safe environment for our users. Other misconceptions that we hear from time to time, one was you heard in Ohio that there were certain people saying, well, we're not sure if we can do online sports betting because of this controversy over the Wire Act, which really never made any sense. Everyone agrees that the Wire Act applies to sports wagering, and that all the leading sports wagering operators have designed their operations to ensure compliance with the Wire Act. There may be some open questions with respect to iGaming, though I think those are often overstated as well. Another misconception we hear from time to time is the idea that online gaming and online sports betting won't add to the state coffers because they'll simply vulture money from other gaming products, whether that's in-person casino revenues or the state lottery. And we just have enough evidence now from New Jersey and Pennsylvania and other places that have authorized these products that the revenues are really additive as we capture users who were previously betting in the illegal market, or users who don't want to go to a retail casino but are interested in iGaming, or didn't want to participate in the offshore market, but now there's an authorized market with known name brands, like a FanDuel, that they would be interested in getting involved. So we really do believe it's additive, and there's good evidence for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the evidence is pretty clear that a rising tide is lifting all boats, and also that the iGaming or mobile sports betting is really attracting a different type of consumer than would step foot into a casino necessarily. Not always the case, and there's a lot of overlap there, but it's certainly being able to engage consumers that may not be interested in the casino experience, the live casino experience. So before we get on to the next slide, I do want to remind all of our audience that you can please ask questions in the GoToWebinar panel. Just type in there your question. It'll get filtered to me, and hopefully we can get to it throughout before we're done here today. So as we get to the next panel, or the next slide, we talked a little bit already about the influence of the black market on how that motivates lawmakers. We actually saw some news earlier this week where one of the largest black market operators is leaving the U.S. market, and perhaps with an eye to reentry at some point in the future, but they are leaving. Senator Ford, do you guys have any intel on how the legal market has impacted the illegal market in Indiana at all?
Not that I've seen to this point. I know we've had a few local organizations that the police intervened and stopped their operations, but no online intel at this point.
Great. And Liv, everyone thinks of kind of the illegal black market with respect to sports betting, but there is a really robust market out there for internet slots and casino style games, as well as internet poker. Your company has a diversified portfolio of products. How do you guys view that market, and is that something that you guys talk about when you talk to lawmakers about how that that market is something that should be eliminated, and the best way to eliminate it is through a legal market.
No, absolutely. And I think this kind of goes back to the misconception element as well. We shouldn't underestimate consumers today. They're very tech savvy. They know how VPN works, and they will find access to an illegal offer, which again is either more complete because they offer both a combination of poker, iGaming, sports betting. They're very aggressive in their bonusing campaigns and tactics. So customers will find access to that offshore offer. So the best way and the primary reason to tackle offshore offering is by having solid, attractive regulation in place. So customers have no reason to seek that offshore offer. But obviously that regulatory aspect has to go hand in hand with some kind of enforcement. And New Jersey has definitely taken, a good stance on enforcing against the offshore operators, which is still very much present. The only way, however, to make enforcement successful is to really provide for holistic enforcement. So it has to be a combination of regulators, state legislatures, but also on federal level. There needs to be an understanding of the problem and a collaboration both on federal and state level, and it can take a form of criminal prosecution. There's there's ISP blocking, there's PSP blocking. There's many ways of enforcing against offshore operators, but again, it has to be a combination of providing a solid regulatory framework and then going after the offshore operators, because as Corey previously pointed out, it's a highly competitive market. It's very difficult for operators like FanDuel and Kindred within the regulated sphere to compete with these operators. So it has to be a mutual solution of regulation and enforcement.
Great. So we had a question that came in that I want to ask right now, because it does, I think, relate a little bit to the black market. There are some states that have refused to, they've legalized sports wagering, but have put a prohibition on in-state collegiate teams betting. How does that impact the overall product offering from a revenue standpoint, and does that put the illegal operators at a greater advantage since they continue to offer those markets? I'll Liv, if you want to jump in, and Corey and anyone else that wants to answer, I'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, maybe just one thing on that, John. Obviously, one of the primary reasons for excluding certain events from the sports wagering sphere is the concern about integrity, the concern about match fixing, the concern about corruption, and conflict of interest. And that concern is obviously very real, but there's, similar to the question of problem behavior or potential problem behaviors, there's ways to deal with that. There's ways to mitigate it. There's plenty of great international initiatives on information sharing, on checking lists against customer databases, on educational campaigns about the do's and don'ts when you're an athlete or you're, league personnel, and what you should and shouldn't be betting on. So if integrity is a real concern for excluding certain events from your sports wagering offer, there are things that we should be looking into first, rather than just having a black and white exclusion.
Great.
Yeah, and I would just add to what Liv's good points and say a couple things. One is, obviously most bettors and consumers in general don't want to split their wallet across multiple products. So if there is an offshore product that offers the college bets they want to make, they're also going to make all their professional bets there and do all their other gaming there as well, because it's really sort of a pain, and sometimes the offshore books make it even more of a pain to move their money around. So I think that's a real hindrance to the legal authorized markets. The other point I'd make is just, the old saying, sunlight is the best disinfectant. If these folks are really worried about integrity in their colleges, they should want to see what bets are being made on their college games, rather than forcing them all underground and back to the illicit market, such that they have no idea what bets are being made. And sometimes I worry that they're more comfortable not knowing, and that really doesn't seem right to me.
Right. Well, good news, at least in Michigan and Indiana, I don't believe there are those restrictions there. And the NCAA has had a kind of a Jekyll and Hyde approach to sports betting. And recently, just yesterday, we saw that a major Pac-12 university signed a deal with one of the big sports betting brands in Colorado. So it's an interesting and evolving position, I think, for universities. But one area that has really evolved is the major sports leagues, the NBA, the NFL, Major League Baseball, and NHL, and of course I include PGA in there as well. They seem to be coming around to the idea that betting on their games is actually good for their games and good for that it's done in a legal and regulated environment. Brant, as you look across the country, I know you had all 4 major sports leagues and the PGA active in Michigan. Do you think they're going to play a role in state legalization across the country, and what in a positive or negative way, how do you think they'll fit in here?
Yeah, well, absolutely, and you're seeing those agreements start to unfold already. I believe just last week, or when was it, last Thursday, Friday, or Monday? I forgive me now, but the Detroit Lions obviously just inked a deal now, and you're going to start to see more and more of that. I believe whether it's universities or professional teams, they are playing a huge role. They did in Michigan. Obviously, it was important to me personally that that they were part of the conversation. At the end of the day, it is their players, their athletes, those folks out there on the field, on the court, and everybody does need to be working together to make sure that we've got the best legislation in place possible. And I felt that the only way to do that was to make sure that all voices were heard in the conversation. And I think that, and I hope, I should say, that sparks the conversations to continue in those other states as well. And I do believe we will start to see that. It's becoming more and more accepted now. More and more states are starting to realize as they enter this discussion that they're big stakeholders in the conversation, and that's an important part to. And there's many different ways to do it. There's many, and I'm not saying the way Michigan did it, is certainly the best way. It worked for what I wanted to accomplish and what I believed in terms of using the official league data for the in-play bets. And we'll see. I think that it'll look different in each state, but I think that it will be a factor in each state. And I think that it has to be, in my opinion, only because they are a huge stakeholder.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to believe that they wouldn't have an influence in trying to get the legislation done in some big states where you have all 4 major sports teams. Senator Ford, what's your thoughts on this and the influence of the sports leagues moving forward?
Yeah, certainly they played a role in our legislation, our rollout here in Indiana, and we took their advice and listened to what they had to say, and I think we came together with a fair compromise. They didn't get everything they wanted, but we did put some things in that they would like. And I think what we're going to see moving forward is in the product, the sports wagering product, we're going to see more and more of the leagues, having games, having things in the products, the co-branding that will help everybody in the sports industry. And I think especially now with back to the COVID situation where we've moved to a more digital focus, and you see what the leagues are doing now with the fans, interactive fans in the stands with digital screens. I think we'll see more and more development from the leagues that they'll be offering to bettors.
Great. So we hear a lot about stakeholders, whether it's the sports leagues or betting companies that are going to state capitals to lobby for laws, and obviously they are testifying at hearings. But what about the end user? Are there any organized grassroots efforts to mobilize voters to contact lawmakers about iGaming and sports betting legalization? Corey, do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah, so we have certainly seen some, specifically on the sports wagering side. There are obviously a lot of sports fans out there who are really, excited about the prospect of legalized sports betting. So there's an organization out there called Fans for the Future, and we've seen them organizing to give users the easy opportunity to contact their state representative and encourage them to authorize sports betting in their jurisdiction. So we've seen some of that, and I think, you know, as we move through the COVID era, we'll see more on the iGaming side, as well as folks who don't want to or can't go to casinos will encourage their state lawmakers to authorize online iGaming as well.
Brant and Senator Ford, did you guys hear from a lot of constituents when you guys were going through the process?
I'll jump in there real briefly and just mention, yeah, absolutely. And Corey really hit it on the head. There's thanks to groups like FanDuel and DraftKings and others, they've got huge networks. They've got a lot of players that were already playing fantasy. They're able to get out as well and say, hey, you know, in case you were, you know, via text message or you know, an email, and just says, hey, look, contact your local lawmaker and let them know that you support XYZ legislation, says Senate Bill 123 or whatever it happens to be, because it's important to the players and the sanctity of the game and what you're interested in. So yeah, I think that there is a huge grassroots movement, and I think that there will be more of that, especially as you see bigger states. I mean, as we look to California, Texas, Florida, that's gonna play a big part in decisions that are being made and how those legislators tackle that issue in their states.
Yeah, I would agree. We certainly had a groundswell of positive messages from the grassroots in support of sports wagering. And, you know, it helped some lawmakers, you know, accept it, that people were interested. They did view sports wagering as entertainment. And, you know, hopefully moving forward, we'll continue to get the grassroots to be active and participate in this legislation.
Great. Well, if we get on to the our last slide before some Q&A, and I know we're running short on time here, I want to just get some predictions from folks on what we may see this fall and in 2021 on both the iGaming and sports betting side. Liv, I'm going to put you on the spot first to see, you know, what you think, what you've heard about, you know, potential new markets that could open up even before the end of this year, and then looking ahead to 2021.
Yeah, I think, I mean, there's two states that kind of come top of mind. I think it's going to be interesting to see, obviously, what Virginia will do in Q4. We know that they're opening up their tender, or expected to open up their tender in October. They've got 4 to 7 online-only licenses available. So, and they're very ambitious in terms of their go-live timeline. So I think Virginia is going to be an interesting one to monitor. Ohio is another one. You know, we've seen very positive developments earlier this year. Obviously, that was cut short during the pandemic, but they've extended their session. So, yeah, looking very curious to see what will happen in the you know, after the elections, November, December in Ohio, in terms of opening up their market. So Virginia, Ohio, definitely monitoring those two states.
Great. And if you look at 2021, are there some states? I mean, I think one of the things that I've been looking at is, like a state like Indiana, if you've legalized mobile sports wagering, you're probably you're probably a good candidate to look at now extending that to iGaming. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I think that's kind of the, you know, the second wave of regulations that we expect and hope to see happening 2021 onwards, is, you know, the states that have implemented sports wagering regulations to embrace the iGaming angle and implement rules there as well. So that second wave, I think, will definitely cover 21, 22 and onwards. So, and I think that's kind of the interesting dynamic that we see in the US. It's both that first wave, states just opening up and implementing, introducing regulations, and then states that have advanced a bit more and embracing the developments and the growth potential of the market, and basically looking ahead to ensure again that customers find what they're looking for within that regulated governance framework.
Great. Corey, same question to you. What do you look for the fall of this year and into 2021?
Yeah, so I think, you know, Liv got some of the right states. I agree with what she said as well. I think we're interested in how Virginia develops. Obviously Tennessee is also, moving towards rollout maybe late this year, early next year. Illinois has already started to roll out. FanDuel is live there for mobile registration for the time being, but it's been an interesting and rocky start there. And as we already discussed, Michigan later in the year. But sort of down the road a little bit further, I agree about Ohio. We're also looking. We think Massachusetts may seek to authorize sports wagering this fall. And New York has this enormous budget deficit. There's been some discussion of a large gaming package there that would include authorizing the remaining casinos that are allowed under their constitution. We imagine that would include sports wagering as well. And then down the road, I agree that states that have authorized sports betting will see the same kinds of protections in place, see how the account works, depositing works, RG controls work, and recognize that adding iGaming to that suite of products will allow them to gain revenue while not really introducing any additional risks given the good controls in place.
Great. Senator Ford and Representative Iden, I know you already know what's going on in your own states, but you're also involved with Nickel G's, the organization that represents lawmakers from gaming states across the country. I think you're both officers in that organization, so you're probably having conversations with folks regularly about the future of iGaming and sports betting. What are you hearing?
Well, this is John. I'll go first. Yeah, we're hearing definitely many of the states already mentioned. Those folks have been attending our conferences the past couple of years. I would agree. I think Ohio and Illinois, and Tennessee and Virginia are states to watch. And here in Indiana, we're gonna put a bill forward, and we're gonna try and see what if it will stick. But it'll take a lot of education.
I'm going to jump in and say, I'm going to throw one out there that hasn't been talked about yet, John, only because I think that this will be a very interesting test case, and that is Louisiana. You've got a situation where it's going to a vote of the people. You've got already an interesting parish system, and how that all works is always, just from a state government geek standpoint like myself, I find it interesting anyway. But here's why it'll be an interesting test case. We haven't seen any state really move forward with a vote of the people on this issue. And you've got an interesting dynamic in Louisiana. You've got a deeply conservative parts of the South, social conservatives. You've got very liberal folks in the more urban areas as well. And this dynamic, I think, is going to bring together, and I think you're going to be able to see what Louisiana may show. And again, purely speculative on my part, is it may show the appetite for what something could look like in the event that other states have to move forward with a ballot referendum of some kind. I mean, obviously that conversation is constantly being talked about in Florida, and what happens with the card rooms and the tribal debate in California is always interesting. But to me, when you put this to a referendum, you're going to see, and if it comes back overwhelming that people support sports betting, I think you're going to see other states quickly come on board. So I think Louisiana is going to be one of the most interesting test cases out there. Although I agree with the rest of the panel that you're going to see a lot of action in those other states coming into 2021, and it's going to be a very exciting year for gaming. And I know I'm looking forward to it.
Great. And I also would throw Maryland in the mix there. They have a ballot initiative up. Both Maryland and Louisiana lawmakers will have to come back in the new year and kind of put pen to paper on what those bills will look like. But I think, the industry should really be paying close attention to what's happening in Maryland and Louisiana with respect to sports wagering. And I think you're right. Overwhelming victories there, I think, would send a good signal to other states and state lawmakers that there is, significant public support for this. Well, if we maybe have a time for a couple questions and answers, looking at some of the questions that came in, one of the questions was on about mobile registration. Fortunately, Michigan and Indiana had the foresight to not require an in-person registration, and we see that Iowa, I think, will be changing their rules and regulations soon to allow for in-person registration. Corey, you guys mentioned Illinois, and I don't know if anyone can predict what's going to happen in the future there, but what's your company's thought on in-person registration and its impact on the gaming product? Corey, we still got you?
I was on mute. I'll learn to use that button soon. It's tremendously detrimental to the rollout of a mobile product to require in-person registration. And I think sort of ironically, the COVID pandemic over the last 6 months has sort of shown how ridiculous it is to send people to a physical location for no purpose whatsoever, sort of just killing the market, but also introducing risk where there doesn't need to be any. And so that's why you've seen Illinois move to allow for mobile registration during this period. Iowa did a phased rollout. So right now it's in-person registration, but starting in January, it will go to mobile registration. And you've seen sort of a slow trickle of operators into the Iowa market, knowing that the market won't really heat up until mobile registration is allowed in January. So mobile registration is absolutely critical to a successful product. And we're glad that states like Michigan and Indiana were able to do their products right.
Do you expect then more operators to enter into Iowa once full remote registration's in place?
That would be my expectation. I think with a bunch of different states opening up over the past year, people have focused on the states that offer the greatest opportunity. It takes a lot of time, effort, and resources in order to open in a state from a regulatory perspective, from a marketing perspective, from an engineering perspective. And so I think folks were more focused on a state like Colorado, which had a really good set of regulations in place, rather than a state like Iowa, where you need in-person registration that really hurts the addressable market there.
Right, and I would encourage folks to go to the Idea Growth website, and under our resources page, there is a study that that Idea Growth put on that looks at the impact of in-person registration. Our friends at Eilers Krycek put that study together, and it's really informative. It's something that we share with lawmakers across the country, and I think it's good for industry to use it as a resource when you're talking to lawmakers as well. Well, we're pretty much coming to the end of our time, and I know there are a couple questions I couldn't get to, but we want to be respectful of everybody's 1 hour Power Lunch Summit, as we're calling this, and the Power Lunch is always an hour. So we really appreciate everyone's participation. I do have a couple closing things to say before we end, but I do just want to thank everyone for being on this panel and for all your tremendous insights. Thank you, Liv. Thank you, Senator Ford. Thank you, Representative Wyden, and thank you, Corey, very much for your participation. So at the close of today's webinar, you're going to get a short survey. It's going to pop up, giving you the opportunity to let us know your thoughts on future webinars and ask additional questions if you may have them for a specific panelist. So we will be able to answer questions after the fact. Please send them our way. We'll make sure that the panelists get them, and hopefully they can respond directly to you. And all registered attendees will receive a link to an on-demand webinar that should be coming out next week. I do want to remind everyone that there are 2 more panels in this, or 2 more panels in this series. So tomorrow at noon and on Friday at noon as well. So I encourage you to sign up for those. And then finally, if you guys are interested in learning more about Idea Growth, please contact our director, Amy Knapp, and she can be found at amy@ideagrowth.org. And thank you again for joining us today, and we look forward to having you join a future webinar.